Clara May Whitmore's knees hit the frozen ground. The flour sack split open white powder mixing with white snow, and she didn't move to save it. She just knelt there, 5 children crying behind her, and waited for God to finish what the winter had started. She'd carried them all for 4 months alone. Today, she couldn't carry anymore. Then, she heard it hoofbeats through the storm. Subscribe now and follow this journey to the end. Comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The flour was gone. Clara stared at the white powder bleeding into the snow, and something inside her chest cracked open like river ice in spring. 4 months. 4 months she'd held it together. 4 months of chopping wood with blistered hands, of rationing beans, until the children's ribs showed through their clothes, of telling them Daddy's watching from heaven when she didn't believe in heaven anymore. And now the flour was gone. "Mama," Samuel's voice. 12 years old and sounding like 40. She couldn't look at him, couldn't let him see what was happening to her face. "Mama, you're shaking." "I know." Her voice came out strange, flat, like someone else was using her mouth. "Take your sisters inside." "But, Samuel." She still didn't turn. "Take them inside, now." She heard him gather the little ones. Lucy was crying. Or maybe Hannah. The twins cried so much these days she couldn't tell them apart by their sobs anymore. Abigail was asking questions. What happened? Why is Mama on the ground? Is the flour ruined? And Thomas was coughing. Always coughing. That wet, rattling sound that kept Clara awake at night, counting the seconds between each breath. The door of the soddy creaked open, creaked shut. Silence. Clara let her head fall forward. Snow soaked through her skirt, through her stockings, burning cold against her knees. She should get up. She should go inside and figure out what to feed them for dinner. She should pray or curse or do something other than kneel here like a broken woman waiting to freeze. But she was tired. God help her, she was so tired. "I can't," she whispered to no one. To the snow. To her dead husband rotting in the ground behind the barn. "Daniel, I can't do this anymore. You left me. You left me with 5 children and $40 and a winter that won't end, and I can't—" Her voice broke. She'd sworn she wouldn't cry. Not once in 4 months had she let herself cry where the children might hear. But now, alone in the snow with the flour ruined and the last of her strength draining out through her knees, Clara May Whitmore wept. She wept until her chest ached, until snot froze on her upper lip, until her hands, buried in the snow, went numb enough that she couldn't feel them anymore. And then she heard the horse. Josiah Callahan had been riding since dawn. The storm caught him halfway between Rollins and his cabin, and any sensible man would have found shelter and waited it out. But Josiah hadn't been sensible in years. Sensible men didn't live alone on a mountain. Sensible men didn't spend 6 winters talking to nobody but their horse and their ghosts. He pulled his collar up against the wind and squinted through the white. Another mile, maybe 2. His mare knew the way home better than he did. All he had to do was stay in the saddle and not freeze to death. Then he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the snow, a shadow, a drift shaped like something human. But shadows didn't wear gray dresses. Shadows didn't have hair coming loose from their pins whipping in the wind like something wild and dying. Josiah pulled up on the reins. The woman was on her knees in front of a soddy, the kind homesteaders built when they couldn't afford lumber. The roof sagged under snow weight. The door hung crooked. And she knelt there in the middle of it all, not moving, while white powder flour, he realized, spilled flour blew away around her. He should keep riding. That was his first thought, and he hated himself for it. But he'd learned long ago that other people's troubles had a way of becoming your own, and he had enough troubles already. Enough ghosts. Enough cold nights spent wondering if Margaret had forgiven him for not saving her, if his son had ever drawn breath before. The woman swayed. Just slightly. Like a tree about to fall. Josiah was off his horse before he knew he'd moved. Clara heard boots crunching through snow. Heavy, steady, a man's gait. She should be afraid. Out here alone, a woman with 5 children and no husband. She should be reaching for the rifle Daniel had left her, the one she'd sold 3 weeks ago, to buy medicine for Thomas. She should be standing up, squaring her shoulders, putting on the face she wore for the men who came by to see if the widow needed company. Instead, she just knelt there. Let him come. Let him take what he wanted. She was too empty to fight. "Ma'am?" The voice was low, rough, like a man who didn't use it much. Clara didn't answer. "Ma'am, you're gonna freeze if you stay down there." A pause, the crunch of another step, and then quieter. "Can you hear me?" Something in that second question made her lift her head. He stood 3 paces away, hat in his hands. Big man, broad shoulders, a coat that had seen better days and eyes that had seen worse. Snow caught in his dark beard, and his face was the kind of weathered that came from years of hard living and harder choices. He wasn't young. Neither was she. "I can hear you," Clara said. Her voice sounded hollow, used up. "I'm not deaf. I'm just done." The man blinked. Whatever he'd expected her to say, it wasn't that. Done with what? Everything. She watched his face change. Watched him look past her to the soddy, to the sagging roof and the crooked door, and the flowers still blowing away in white ribbons. Watched him put it together, the widow, the failing homestead, the kind of poverty that killed people slow. She waited for pity. She'd learned to hate pity. But what crossed his face wasn't pity. It was something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "How many inside?" he asked. The question startled her. "What children?" His voice was steady. "I can see small boot prints. How many?" Clara's throat tightened. 5. His jaw clenched. Just a flicker, but she saw it. "When did you eat last?" "That's not your concern." "When?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The man looked at the ruined flower, looked at the soddy, looked at her kneeling in the snow with her dress soaked through and her hands blue with cold. Then he did something that made no sense at all. He took off his coat. "What are you—" He draped it over her shoulders before she could finish. Heavy wool warm from his body. It smelled like pine smoke and horse, and something underneath that was just him, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. "You'll freeze," she said. "I've got more fat than you do." He crouched in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the gray threading through his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes didn't slide away from hers like most men's did. "Can you stand?" "I don't know." "Try." It wasn't a command, just a word, simple and direct. Something about it made her want to obey. Clara put her hands on her thighs and pushed. Her legs shook, her knees screamed. But she rose inch by inch until she was standing upright in the snow with a stranger's coat around her shoulders. The man stood with her. He didn't offer his arm, didn't try to steady her, just stood there close enough to catch her if she fell. "What's your name?" Clara asked. "Josiah Callahan." "You live around here?" "Up the mountain, 3 miles north." 3 miles. Close enough to have passed her place 100 times. She'd never seen him. "You always stop for strange women in snowstorms?" she asked. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. "Only the ones still standing." She should tell him to leave, should thank him for the coat and send him on his way back to his cabin and his life away from her and her children and her bottomless well of need. Men didn't help women like her for free. They always wanted something. But the coat was so warm, and she was so cold. "I don't have anything to pay you with," she said. "I don't recall asking for payment." "Then what do you want?" He looked at her for a long moment. Snow fell between them, soft and silent. "Right now," he said. I want to get you and your children somewhere they won't freeze to death." The children huddled by the stove when Clara came through the door. Samuel had gotten a fire going, good boy, smart boy, the only reason they'd survived this long, but the wood was damp and the flames were weak. The soddy was barely warmer than outside. 5 pairs of eyes turned toward her, then toward the man behind her. Samuel stepped forward immediately. His hand went to his belt where he'd started keeping his father's old hunting knife. "Who's that?" His voice cracked between boy and man. "Mama, who is that?" "His name is Mr. Callahan." Clara heard how strange her voice sounded. Mechanical, like she was reading from a script. "He stopped to help." "We don't need help." "Samuel." "We don't." The boy's chin jutted forward. The same stubborn set of his father's jaw, the same fire in his eyes that Daniel had before the sickness took it all away. "We've been doing fine on our own." Behind him, Thomas started coughing again. The wet, horrible sound filled the small space. Abigail rubbed his back, her face pale and scared. The twins clung to each other by the stove, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to know it was bad. Josiah didn't respond to Samuel's challenge. He just looked around the soddy, taking inventory with the quick assessing gaze of a man who'd seen hard times. The empty flour bin, the last few sticks of wood, the pile of blankets that served as beds, threadbare and not nearly enough. The children, thin, hollow-eyed, dressed in clothes that had been patched and repatched until they were more thread than fabric. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "You got any kin nearby?" he asked Clara. "No." "Neighbors?" "The Hendersons moved out in November. Couldn't make it work." Clara pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. She should give it back. Should make him leave before the children started to hope for things they couldn't have. "There's no one. We're the last ones on this stretch." Josiah nodded like he'd expected as much. "My cabin's got room," he said. "Got food put up for winter. Got a barn for what stock you have." Samuel's eyes widened. "We're not going anywhere with you." "Samuel." "Mama, we don't know him." The boy's voice rose. "He could be anyone. He could be... I could be." Josiah's voice was calm, level. He looked at Samuel like he was talking to an equal, not a child. "You're right to be careful. Only fools trust strangers, and you don't seem like a fool." Samuel's hand tightened on his knife, but he didn't interrupt. "Here's what I know," Josiah continued. "That stove won't keep you warm tonight. You're almost out of wood, and that cough." He nodded toward Thomas. "That cough needs a warm room and hot food, not a drafty soddy with nothing in the pantry." Thomas chose that moment to double over with another fit. The sound was worse than before, deeper, wetter, like something was tearing loose inside his chest. Clara moved without thinking. She knelt beside him, hand on his back, feeling his small ribs heave under her palm. "Breathe, baby. Breathe slow." "It hurts, Mama." I know it hurts." She looked up at Josiah. He was watching Thomas with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not pity, something sharper. "There's a doctor in town," he said quietly. "I can take him." "We can't afford a doctor." "Did I ask if you could afford it?" Clara's jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "Then call it a loan." "I can't pay back a loan either." Josiah was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, like he was telling her something he didn't tell many people. "I had a son once. Would have been about his age." He nodded toward Thomas. "He never got to draw his first breath. His mama neither." The soddy went silent, except for Thomas's ragged breathing. Clara stared at this stranger, this big rough man who'd appeared out of a snowstorm like something from a fairy tale, and saw it now. The grief he carried, the way it lived in the lines around his eyes, in the hunch of his shoulders, in the careful distance he kept from everyone and everything. She knew that grief. She wore it too. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out small. It was a long time ago. He looked away toward the weak fire. Point is, I know what it's like to watch someone slip away when you can't do a damn thing to stop it. And I'm not going to stand here and watch it happen again. Samuel hadn't moved. His hand was still on his knife, but his face had changed. You mean it? The boy's voice cracked again. You'd really help him, help us. Wouldn't have offered if I didn't mean it. Clara should say no. Every lesson life had taught her said to refuse that men who seemed kind always wanted something, that help came with strings, that trusting anyone outside her own blood was a good way to end up with less than she started with. But Thomas was coughing blood now. Just a little. Just a fleck on his palm when he pulled it away from his mouth. But Clara saw it, and something inside her broke all over again. Okay, she whispered. Mama? Samuel looked at her uncertain. Mama, are you sure? She stood up. Her legs still shook, but she made them hold. Pack what we need, she told him. Only what we can carry. We leave in an hour. They left in less than that. There wasn't much to pack. A quilt each, the family Bible, a photograph of Daniel taken 2 years ago, back when his eyes still had light in them. Clara's mother's wedding ring, thin as paper now from years of wear. The children moved in silence, too exhausted for questions. Thomas sat by the stove wrapped in blankets, too weak to help. The twins held hands and watched everything with wide, scared eyes. Samuel packed like a soldier preparing for war, every movement precise, every choice calculated. He strapped his father's knife to his belt and carried the axe over his shoulder, though it was almost too heavy for him. Josiah helped load the wagon he'd brought from somewhere his own. Clara realized, left at the ridge for some reason she didn't ask about. He worked without speaking, lifting the heavier items, securing the canvas cover that would keep out the snow. When it was time to go, he lifted Thomas into the wagon bed himself, gentle, careful, like the boy was made of glass. You'll be warm back here, he told the children. Got straw and blankets. Stay under the cover, and you'll be all right. The twins scrambled in after their brother. Abigail helped them settle, her face serious and old. Samuel hesitated at the wagon's edge, looking back at the soddy. We'll come back, Clara said. She didn't know if it was true. When spring comes, we'll come back and plant and try again. Samuel didn't answer. He just climbed into the wagon and pulled the canvas closed. Clara stood alone in front of the home she'd built with her husband, the home where she'd birthed 2 of her children, buried 2 others, nursed Daniel through his last fevered weeks. The home that had been everything and was now nothing but a pile of sod and broken promises. You all right? Josiah's voice. He stood by the wagon, holding the reins, waiting. No, Clara said honestly. I'm not. He nodded, didn't offer comfort. Didn't tell her it would be okay. Just nodded like her answer made perfect sense. You can ride up front, he said. Warmer if you're out of the wind. She should say no. Should insist on riding in the back with her children, keeping distance between herself and this stranger. But she was so tired of being strong. Clara walked to the wagon and let Josiah help her onto the bench. His hand was rough, calloused, but his grip was sure. He climbed up beside her, arranged a buffalo hide over both their laps, and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward. Clara didn't look back. They rode in silence for the first mile. The snow had eased, though the wind still bit. Clara huddled under the buffalo hide, clutching Josiah's coat around her shoulders, watching the white landscape roll past. Everything looked the same out here. Endless drifts, black skeletons of trees, the occasional dark shape of a rock or a frozen creek. She should be grateful, should be thanking God and this stranger and whatever luck had put him on her path today. Instead, she just felt numb. How long were you on your own? Josiah's voice startled her. He'd been so quiet she almost forgot he was there. 4 months, she said. Your husband. Consumption. Took him slow. She stared at her hands chapped and raw under the coat's sleeves. He knew it was coming. Tried to teach me everything before he went how to hunt, how to fix the roof, how to stretch $1 until it screamed. I thought I was ready. No one's ready. She looked at him. You sound like you know. I know. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. Another half-mile passed. The horses plodded through the snow, their breath steaming in the cold air. From the back of the wagon, Clara could hear the twins whispering to each other, Abigail shushing them, Thomas's rough breathing. "What made you stop?" she asked suddenly. Josiah glanced at her. "What?" "Today. You could have kept riding. Most men would have. What made you stop?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was rough. "You looked like you were giving up." "I was. I know." He adjusted the reins, eyes forward. "I've worn that look myself. Would have died wearing it too if someone hadn't stopped for me." Clara let that settle. Two broken people meeting in a snowstorm. It sounded like the beginning of a story her grandmother might have told, the kind where everything worked out in the end, where love healed all wounds, and the future was bright. But Clara didn't believe in those stories anymore. "I can't promise you anything," she said. "I can't promise we'll be easy guests, or that the children will behave, or that I'll be able to pay you back someday. All I can promise is that I'll work. I'll pull my weight. I won't be a burden longer than I have to be." "I don't recall asking for promises." "Then what do you want, Mr. Callahan?" He was quiet again, then so soft she almost missed it. Just someone to share the silence with. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They rode on through the snow, two strangers sharing a buffalo hide, while the wind howled and the day dimmed, and somewhere ahead a cabin waited with warmth and food, and the terrifying possibility of hope. The cabin appeared through the trees, just as the last light faded. It wasn't much rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, a porch barely big enough for 2 chairs. But smoke curled from the chimney, and lantern light glowed in the window, and to Clara's exhausted eyes, it looked like a palace. Josiah pulled the wagon up to the porch and set the brake. "Stay here," he said. "I'll get the fire built up." He disappeared inside. Clara heard him moving around, the thump of logs, the scrape of a poker, the crackle of flames catching. Then he was back, lifting Thomas down from the wagon, carrying the boy inside like he weighed nothing. The other children followed in a daze. Even Samuel was too tired to protest. Clara went last. The cabin was warm. Actually warm, not the damp half-heat of their soddy. A fire roared in a stone hearth big enough to stand in. A table sat near the window, rough but solid. 2 beds filled the far corners, one large, one smaller, both covered with thick quilts. It was simple, bare. The home of a man who'd given up on making things beautiful. But it was warm. "There's stew in the pot," Josiah said. "Not much, but it's hot. Bowls are on the shelf." Samuel moved toward the hearth like a moth to flame. Abigail was already reaching for bowls, her practical nature taking over. The twins had collapsed on the smaller bed, asleep before they hit the quilts. Thomas sat in a chair by the fire, wrapped in blankets, his breathing still rough, but his color already better. Josiah had positioned him just right, close enough to the warmth, angled so the smoke wouldn't catch his lungs. Clara watched him watch this stranger move through his home, fetching blankets, ladling stew, making sure each child was settled, and felt something dangerous stir in her chest. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't you dare start hoping. Mama." Abigail stood beside her, holding a bowl of stew. 9 years old, with her father's eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. "You need to eat," Abigail said. "You always make us eat, but you never eat." Clara took the bowl. Her hands were shaking. "Thank you, baby." "Mr. Callahan says Thomas needs a doctor. He says he'll take him to town tomorrow when the roads are clear. He says—" Abigail stopped, her lower lip trembling. "He says Thomas is going to be okay." Clara pulled her daughter close. The bowl sloshed between them, stew nearly spilling, but she didn't care. "He's going to be okay," Clara whispered. "We're all going to be okay." She didn't believe it, but for the first time in 4 months, she wanted to. Later, after the children had eaten and been tucked into beds and corners, after the fire had been banked and the lanterns dimmed, Clara stood on the porch watching the snow fall. Josiah joined her without a word. He'd given her back his coat, but he stood there in just his shirt arms, crossed against the cold, like he didn't feel it. "They asleep?" he asked. "Most of them. Samuel's keeping watch." She almost smiled. "He doesn't trust you." "Smart boy." "He's had to grow up too fast." Josiah nodded. "They all have." They stood in silence for a while. The snow whispered down, soft and endless, covering the world in white. "I meant what I said," Clara finally told him. "I'll work. I'll earn our keep. I won't—" "Clara." She stopped. It was the first time he'd used her name. "You don't have to earn anything." His voice was quiet. "You just have to let yourself rest." She laughed, a short, broken sound. "I don't know how anymore." "Then learn." He looked at her, and in the dim light from the window, his eyes were gentle. "You got time now. You got a roof and a fire, and someone to watch the door while you sleep. Let that be enough for tonight." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she couldn't just rest, that 4 months of survival had wound her so tight she'd forgotten how to stop, that, if she let go for even a second, everything she'd been holding back would come flooding out and she'd never put herself together again. But she was so tired. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. Just for tonight." She turned toward the door. "Tomorrow, we figure out the rest." "Tomorrow," he agreed. She went inside, closed the door behind her, and collapsed into the chair by the fire. The warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. From the bed in the corner, she could hear Thomas's breathing, still rough but steadier than before. The twins were curled together like puppies. Samuel sat against the wall, his father's knife in his lap, but his eyes were closed. They were safe. For the first time in months, they were safe. Clara put her face in her hands and wept. And outside, Josiah stood on the porch alone, watching the snow fall, thinking about the woman inside with the 5 children and the broken heart, and the strength she didn't even know she had. He'd told himself he was done. Done with people, done with hope, done with anything that might crack open the grief he'd been carrying for 6 long years. But then he'd seen her kneeling in the snow, and something had shifted. Something that felt terrifyingly like the beginning. Clara woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The warmth confused her. The softness beneath her back. The absence of wind whistling through cracks in the walls. Then it came back, the snowstorm, the stranger, the wagon ride through the dark. She sat up too fast. Her head spun. "Easy," Josiah's voice. He stood by the stove, pouring coffee into a tin cup. Morning light slanted through the window, catching dust motes in the air. "The children. Fed and warm. The boy's been up since dawn, watching me like I might steal the silver." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Don't think he blinked once." Clara looked around. Samuel sat in the corner, his father's knife still in his lap, dark circles under his eyes. The twins were awake now, sitting on the bed with Abigail, whispering and pointing at things around the cabin. "Thomas. Where's Thomas?" "Still sleeping. His fever broke an hour ago." Clara's breath caught. "It broke?" "Checked him myself. He's cooler now, still needs a doctor, but he made it through the night." She pressed her hand to her chest. 4 months of fear. 4 months of listening to that cough get worse and worse. 4 months of wondering which morning she'd wake up to find him cold and still, and now his fever had broken. "Thank you," she whispered. Josiah shrugged like it was nothing. Fire did the work. Just needed to get him warm. He brought her the coffee. Their fingers brushed when she took it, and Clara pulled back like she'd touched a hot stove. Josiah didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, He didn't say anything. "I'll ride to town once the road's clear," he said. "Doc Pearson owes me a favor. He'll come out check the boy proper. I told you I can't pay. And I told you I don't recall asking." Clara's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to this being helped without being asked for something in return. It made her feel off balance, vulnerable, like standing on ice that might crack at any moment. "Why are you doing this?" Josiah paused. He'd turned back to the stove, but now he stood still, his broad shoulders tense under his shirt. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I spent 6 years alone in this cabin telling myself I didn't need anyone. Telling myself the silence was enough." He turned to face her. "It wasn't." Clara didn't know what to say, so she just sat there holding her coffee, watching this strange, quiet man who'd appeared out of a snowstorm and turned her world upside down. Samuel chose that moment to stand up. "Mama," his voice was sharp. "Can I talk to you outside?" Clara looked at Josiah. He nodded once, then turned back to the stove like the conversation had never happened. She followed her son onto the porch. The morning was bright and bitter cold. Snow covered everything, turning the world into a sea of white. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and massive against the pale sky. Samuel rounded on her the moment the door closed. "We can't stay here." "Samuel." "We don't know him, Mama. We don't know anything about him. He could be anyone. He could be—" "He saved Thomas's life. He gave us soup and a warm bed. That doesn't mean—" "It means more than anyone else has given us in 4 months." Samuel's face twisted. She could see the war inside him, the boy who wanted to trust fighting against the man he'd been forced to become. "Papa would have wanted us to be careful." The words hit her like a slap. Clara took a breath, steadied herself. "Your papa is gone, Samuel. He's been gone for 4 months, and I have done everything to keep this family together. I sold his rifle. I sold my mother's silver. I buried 2 stillborn babies and a husband, and I kept going because you and your sisters needed me to keep going." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. "But I can't do it alone anymore. I am tired, Samuel. I am so tired I can barely stand. And if this man wants to help us, if he wants to give us a roof and food and a chance to survive the winter, then I am going to let him. Because the alternative is watching your brother die." Samuel stared at her. His chin trembled. "I'm scared, Mama." Clara pulled him close. He was too old to be held like this, too proud to want it, but she held him anyway. He buried his face in her shoulder and shook. "I know, baby. I'm scared too. What if he's not what he seems? Then we'll figure it out together. But right now, he's all we have." She held her son for a long moment. When she finally let go, his eyes were red, but his jaw was set. "I'll keep watch," he said. "I know you will. If he tries anything, then we'll handle it. Together." Samuel nodded. He looked older than 12. Older than any child should ever have to look. They went back inside. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. Josiah rode to town on the second morning and came back with Doc Pearson before sunset. The doctor was a thin, tired-looking man with gray hair and whiskey on his breath, but his hands were steady when he examined Thomas, and his eyes were kind. "Lung fever," he told Clara afterward. "Bad, but not the worst I've seen. Keep him warm, keep him fed, keep him resting. I'll leave some medicine, give him a spoonful morning and night." "Will he be all right?" Doc Pearson hesitated. "He's young. Young bodies fight hard. But you got him here just in time. Another week in that soddy, and we'd be having a different conversation." Clara's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "Thank you," she managed. The doctor looked at her for a long moment, then at Josiah standing silent by the fire. "You're lucky," he said to Clara. "This one doesn't take in strays. Must have seen something special in you." Josiah's face didn't change. Just doing what any man would do. No. Doc Pearson shook his head. You ain't, and we both know it. He left with a promise to return in a week to check on Thomas. Clara stood at the window and watched his wagon disappear down the mountain road. He's right, you know. She turned. Josiah had moved to the table, was wiping it down with a rag. His movements were slow, methodical. He didn't look at her. About what? I don't take in strays. Haven't let anyone pass that door in 6 years. Then why us? He stopped wiping. For a moment he just stood there, rag in hand, staring at the worn wood of the table like it held some answer he couldn't find. I don't know, he said finally. I've been asking myself that same question since I saw you in the snow. Clara didn't know how to respond, so she did what she always did when she didn't know what to say. She found work. The children need their clothes washed. Is there a creek nearby, or? There's a tub in the barn. I'll heat water. I can heat my own water. I know you can. He finally looked at her. But you don't have to. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara found herself sitting by the fire across from Josiah. He was carving something, a small piece of wood that was slowly taking the shape of a horse. His hands moved with practiced ease, shaving off thin curls that fell to the floor. You do that often, she asked. Carving. He shrugged. Gives me something to do with my hands, keeps the thoughts quiet. What thoughts? He was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. The wind murmured outside. The ones that come at night, he said finally. The ones that remind me of everything I lost. Clara understood that. God, did she understand that? Your wife, she said softly. What was her name? Margaret. The word came out rough, like it hurt to say. Margaret Louise Callahan. 23 years old when she died. Would have been 29 now. What was she like? Josiah's hand stilled on the carving. He stared into the fire, and Clara watched his face change, watched the walls come down just for a moment. She laughed at everything, even things that weren't funny, said life was too short to waste on frowning. He swallowed. She made this cabin feel like a home. Made me feel like something other than a broken-down soldier with too many ghosts. How long were you married? 2 years. We'd been trying for a baby almost the whole time. When she finally got pregnant, I thought... He stopped. Drew a breath. I thought everything was finally going to be okay. Clara didn't push. She just waited. The labor went wrong. Josiah continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Baby was turned the wrong way. Doc Pearson did everything he could, but... He shook his head. She bled out in my arms. The baby never even cried. The cabin went silent except for the fire. Clara reached out before she could stop herself. Her hand covered his, stilling the carving. He flinched but didn't pull away. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. He looked at her hand on his, looked at her face. Something passed between them, something fragile and unspoken. It was a long time ago, he said. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. They sat like that for a long moment, her hand on his, the fire crackling. The children breathing soft and slow in the darkness. Then Clara pulled back. I should sleep, she said. You should. But neither of them moved. And when Clara finally rose and went to her bed by the wall, she felt Josiah's eyes on her back, like a touch she couldn't shake. The days took on a rhythm after that. Clara woke early and started breakfast coffee biscuits when there was flour porridge, when there wasn't. Josiah went out to tend the stock while Samuel tagged along, suspicious but curious. The girls helped Clara clean and cook and mend while Thomas rested by the fire, his color slowly returning. It wasn't easy. 5 children in a cabin built for one man made everything crowded and loud. The twins fought over toys. Abigail asked endless questions. Samuel watched Josiah's every move like a hawk watching a snake. But it was working. Somehow, impossibly, it was working. On the 5th day, Clara found Josiah in the barn, fixing a broken harness. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him work. His hands were sure and steady, moving with the ease of long practice. "You need something?" he asked without looking up. "I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" She stepped into the barn. It was warmer in here out of the wind. She could smell hay and leather and horses. "About how long we can stay." His hands paused on the harness. "I told you, as long as you need." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." Clara crossed her arms. "Mr. Callahan, Josiah." "What?" He looked up at her. "My name is Josiah. I think we've moved past Mr. Callahan by now." Her cheeks warmed. She ignored it. "Josiah, then, I need to know what you expect from me." "Expect?" "In return for all of this." She gestured around the barn, toward the cabin, toward everything. "Men don't help women like me for nothing. There's always a price." Josiah set down the harness. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his pants. "What did your husband do to you?" The question caught her off guard. "What? To make you think every man's got an angle. What did he do?" Clara's throat tightened. "Daniel was a good man." "I didn't ask if he was good. I asked what he did." She stared at him. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever looked at her and seen past the widow's weeds to the woman underneath. "He left," she said finally. "Not on purpose, but he left. Got sick and gave up fighting long before his body stopped breathing. Left me to hold everything together while he faded away. That's not your fault." "I know that." "Do you—" Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard. "I made him happy," she whispered. "For a while I made him happy, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough to make him want to stay." Josiah took a step toward her, then another. He stopped just close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. "Clara." His voice was low, rough. "You kept 5 children alive through a Wyoming winter with nothing but grit and stubbornness. You carried them when you had nothing left to carry with. You didn't give up, not even when giving up would have been the easy thing to do." He held her eyes. "If that's not enough, then nothing ever will be." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there looking up at this man who saw her, really saw her in a way no one had in years. "I don't know how to trust anymore," she admitted. "Then don't. Not yet. Just stay. Let yourself rest. The trust will come, or it won't, but you don't have to decide anything today." He reached out and touched her face, just a brush of his fingers against her cheek. Then he stepped back and picked up the harness again. "I should finish this before dark," he said. "The twins wanted to see the horses. Think you could bring them out?" Clara nodded. She didn't trust her voice. She turned and walked back to the cabin, her cheek burning where he'd touched her. That night, Clara dreamed of Daniel. He stood at the foot of her bed, thin and pale the way he'd been in those last weeks. His eyes were sunken, but he was smiling. "You're going to be all right," he said. "I miss you." "I know, but you don't need me anymore." She woke with tears on her face and Josiah's name on her lips. In the corner, Samuel was watching her. "You were talking in your sleep," he said. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" He shrugged. "I wasn't really sleeping anyway." Clara sat up. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. Everyone else was asleep. The twins curled together. Abigail stretched out on her back, Thomas breathing easier than he had in weeks. "Come here," Clara said softly. Samuel hesitated. Then he got up and crossed the room, sitting on the edge of her bed like he used to when he was small and scared of thunderstorms. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About Mr. Callahan. Josiah." He looked at his hands. "He's not what I thought." "What did you think?" "I don't know. That he was like the other men, The ones who came around after Papa died looking at you like—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Like you were something they could take." Clara's heart ached. Her boy had seen too much, understood too much. "He's not like that," Samuel continued. "I've been watching him. He doesn't look at you that way. He looks at you like—" He stopped again, struggling for words. "Like you're a person, not a thing. Is that so strange?" "Yes." Samuel's voice was fierce. "It is. Because nobody else ever did. Not the men in town, not the neighbors, not even Papa at the end. But he does." Clara pulled her son close. "I don't know what's going to happen," she said. "I don't know if we'll stay here or go back to the homestead in spring or find somewhere else entirely. But I know one thing." "What?" "You don't have to protect me all the time. You're still just a boy, Samuel. You're allowed to be a boy." He was quiet for a long moment. Then so soft, she almost missed it. "I don't remember how." Clara held him tighter and let him cry. The next morning, something shifted. Samuel came to breakfast without his father's knife for the first time since they'd arrived. He sat down across from Josiah and looked him in the eye. "I want to learn," he said. Josiah set down his coffee cup. "Learn what?" "Everything. How to fix things. How to hunt. How to take care of the horses." He swallowed. "Papa tried to teach me, but he got sick before he could finish. I need to know how to take care of them. In case—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Josiah nodded slowly. "All right." "All right? You want to learn, I'll teach you. But I don't take half efforts. You start something, you finish it. Understood?" Samuel sat up straighter. "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old." "Yes, I mean okay." Clara watched the exchange from the stove, her heart swelling with something she couldn't name. Across the table, the twins were giggling at something Abigail had whispered. Thomas was actually eating his breakfast instead of just pushing it around his plate. For the first time in 4 months, her family looked like a family again. Josiah caught her eye. The corner of his mouth twitched. "More coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured her a cup, and their fingers brushed again. This time, neither of them pulled away. 2 days later, a rider came up the mountain. Clara saw him first, a dark shape moving through the snow coming from the direction of town. Her heart seized. "Josiah!" He was at her side in an instant, one hand on her elbow, steady and sure. "I see him." "Who is it?" "Don't know. Stay inside with the children." "But—" "Clara!" His voice was firm. "Stay inside." She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him to face whatever was coming together, but the children were behind her and she was their mother, and that came first. She went inside. From the window, she watched Josiah walk down to meet the rider. The man dismounted slowly, older she could see now, with a black coat and a rigid posture that spoke of hard authority. They spoke for several minutes. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Josiah's back stiffen, could see his hands clench at his sides. Then the rider looked toward the cabin, looked right at her. Something cold slithered down Clara's spine. Josiah turned and walked back up the hill. His face was closed off, unreadable, but his eyes were blazing. "Who was that?" Clara asked the moment he came through the door. "Man from town. Preacher, he says, looking for a woman named Clara Whitmore." He looked at her. "Says he's your brother-in-law." The world dropped out from under her feet. "Ezekiel. You know him. He's Daniel's brother. We haven't spoken in years. He and Daniel had a falling out before we came west." Clara's hands were shaking. "What does he want?" Josiah's jaw clenched. "Your children." Clara couldn't feel her legs. She stood in the middle of Josiah's cabin, surrounded by her children, and the words kept echoing in her head like a gunshot that wouldn't stop reverberating. "Your children. He wants your children." "Mama!" Abigail's voice came from somewhere far away. "Mama, what's wrong?" Clara couldn't answer. Her throat had closed up. Her hands had gone numb. Josiah moved toward her slow and careful, like approaching a wounded animal. "Clara, Clara, look at me." She looked. His face swam in and out of focus. "Breathe," he said. "Just breathe." She tried. The air came in ragged shallow. Not enough. Never enough. "What does he mean?" Samuel had stepped forward, his voice high and tight with fear. "What does he mean he wants us?" Josiah didn't take his eyes off Clara. "He's got papers, says a judge in Cheyenne signed them. Claims your mama's unfit to raise you." "That's a lie." "I know it's a lie, but he's got the law on his side, or says he does." Clara finally found her voice. It came out cracked, broken. "When? He's coming back tomorrow. Said he wanted to give you time to say goodbye." Something inside Clara snapped. Not broken, not defeated. Snapped like a rope pulled too tight, finally letting go. "No." Josiah blinked. "What?" "No." Her voice was stronger now. Steadier. "He doesn't get to come here with his papers and his righteous judgment and take my children. Not after everything. Not after I buried my husband and 2 babies and kept this family alive through a winter that should have killed us all." She was shaking, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Something hot and fierce that had been buried under 4 months of exhaustion and grief. "He can take his papers and burn them for all I care. These are my children. Mine. And no judge in Cheyenne or anywhere else is going to tell me I'm not fit to raise them." Josiah stared at her. Something shifted in his face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "What do you want to do?" "I want to fight." "You might lose." "I've been losing for 4 months. I'm still standing." She lifted her chin. "So let him come. Let him try." Samuel moved to stand beside his mother. His father's knife was back in his belt, and his jaw was set in that stubborn line Clara knew so well. "I'm with Mama," he said. Abigail joined them, then the twins clinging to Clara's skirt. Even Thomas, weak and pale by the fire, struggled to his feet. "We're all with Mama," Thomas said, and then he started coughing, but he didn't sit back down. He stood there, swaying slightly, his small hands balled into fists. Clara looked at her children, her fierce, brave, broken children who had survived so much, and felt tears burn in her eyes. "All right," Josiah said quietly. "Then we fight." That night, no one slept. Clara sat by the fire, staring into the flames running through every possibility in her mind. Ezekiel had money. He had connections. He had the weight of respectability that came with being a preacher in a proper town back east. What did she have? A borrowed cabin, 5 thin children, and a stranger who'd pulled her out of the snow. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough, but she'd fight anyway. "You should try to rest." Josiah's voice came from the shadows. He sat in the corner, cleaning his rifle with slow, methodical strokes. The firelight caught the hard planes of his face, the gray in his beard. "Can't," Clara said. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him taking them away." "That's not going to happen." "You don't know that." "You're right. I don't." He set down the rifle. "But I know you. I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen what you're made of. And I'm telling you, any man who thinks he can break you hasn't been paying attention." Clara's chest tightened. "You barely know me." "I know enough." "What if it's not enough? What if he wins?" Josiah stood and crossed the room. He crouched in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Then we figure out what comes next. Together." He paused. "I'm not going to let you face this alone, Clara. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm standing with you." "Why?" "Because you asked me to help you carry it. And I meant what I said." She looked at him, this quiet, broken man who'd opened his home to her family, who'd fed her children and saved her son, and asked for nothing in return. And something cracked open in her chest. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I've never been this scared, not even when Daniel died, not even when I thought we were going to freeze. That's because you had something to lose then. Now you've got something to fight for." Clara let out a breath that was almost a sob. "I don't know how to do this." "Yes, you do." His hand found hers in the dark. "You've been doing it your whole life." She held on to him like an anchor in a storm. And for a moment, just a moment, the fear receded enough to let something else in, something that felt dangerously like hope. Ezekiel Whitmore arrived at noon. He came in a proper carriage, this time black and polished, pulled by two matching bays. A driver sat up front, stiff-backed and silent, and behind him, stepping down with the careful dignity of a man who believed God was on his side, came Daniel's brother. Clara hadn't seen him in 5 years. He'd aged, but not softened. His hair was grayer now, his face more lined, but his eyes were the same cold and hard as river stones. "Clara." His voice was smooth practiced, the voice of a man who gave sermons to crowded churches and expected to be obeyed. "I hoped you'd had time to come to your senses." She stood on Josiah's porch, her children behind her, her spine straight as iron. "My senses are just fine, Ezekiel." "Reverend Whitmore, please. I've earned the title." "You haven't earned anything from me." His lips thinned. "I see time hasn't improved your disposition. And I see time hasn't improved your arrogance." Josiah stepped out of the cabin and stood beside her. He didn't speak, didn't threaten, just stood there solid as a mountain, his presence saying everything his words didn't. Ezekiel's eyes flicked to him. "And who might this be?" "Josiah Callahan. This is my land." "Ah, the hermit." Ezekiel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've heard about you. They say you haven't spoken to another soul in 6 years. Interesting that you've chosen now to break your silence. Interesting that you've chosen now to pretend you care about your brother's children." The smile vanished. "I've always cared about them. That's why I'm here. To save them from this." He gestured at the cabin, at Clara, at everything. "This degradation." "Degradation?" Clara's voice was sharp. "You call a warm home and full bellies degradation. I call living in sin with a stranger degradation. I call abandoning your homestead degradation. I call letting your children run wild while I what?" Clara stepped forward. "While I did whatever it took to keep them alive, while I sold everything I owned to buy medicine for my son, while I buried my husband alone because you couldn't be bothered to come. I wasn't informed until—" "You weren't informed because you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with us. Daniel wrote to you when he first got sick. He begged you to come. You never even answered." Ezekiel's face tightened. "That's a family matter. So is this. And you lost the right to call yourself family when you turned your back on your own brother." They stood facing each other, the air between them crackling with years of resentment. Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I'm not giving you my children, Ezekiel. Not today. Not ever." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This says otherwise. Judge Harrison in Cheyenne has declared you unfit. I have legal authority to take custody of all 5 children and return them to civilization." "Let me see that." He handed it over with a thin smile. Clara read it quickly, her heart sinking with every line. It was official, stamped and signed. Her name spelled out in cold legal language. The mother, Clara May Whitmore, having demonstrated an inability to provide suitable care. Living conditions deemed inadequate. Moral character called into question. "Who told them this?" she demanded. "Who gave them these lies?" "They're not lies. They're observations from concerned citizens who've seen the state of your homestead. The county surveyor passed by 2 weeks ago. He reported a collapsed roof, starving livestock, children without proper clothing. Ezekiel's voice dripped with false sympathy. I'm not trying to punish you, Clara. I'm trying to save you. From yourself. By taking my children. By giving them the life they deserve. A proper home, an education, a Christian upbringing. I am a Christian. You're living with a man who isn't your husband. The words hung in the air like poison. Clara felt Josiah tense beside her. She wanted to explain that it wasn't like that they hadn't even touched, that he'd been nothing but honorable. But she could see in Ezekiel's eyes that it wouldn't matter. He'd already made up his mind. The children will come with me today, Ezekiel said. You can visit them, of course, once you've demonstrated that you're capable of... No. The voice wasn't Clara's. It was Samuel's. He stepped out from behind his mother, his father's knife in his hand. His face was pale, but his eyes were blazing. We're not going anywhere with you. Ezekiel looked down at him like he was looking at an insect. Samuel, put that away. You don't understand what's... I understand that you let my father die alone. I understand that you never came, never wrote, never cared about any of us until now. And I understand that you're not my family. Not anymore. Samuel. My family is here. He pointed at Clara. She's my family. They're my family. He pointed at his sisters, at Thomas, at Josiah. And if you try to take us, I'll fight you. I'll fight you until I can't fight anymore. Clara's heart swelled with pride and terror. Her boy. Her brave, foolish, wonderful boy. Ezekiel's face had gone red. You see, this is what I'm talking about. A proper boy doesn't threaten his elders. A proper boy doesn't wave a knife around like some kind of savage. This is exactly why. Enough. Josiah's voice was quiet, but it cut through Ezekiel's tirade like a blade. I've been listening to you talk for 10 minutes now, and I haven't heard one word about what's best for these children. All I've heard is what's best for you, for your reputation, for your sense of righteous superiority. He took a step forward. Ezekiel took a step back. You want to talk about Christian upbringing? Here's what I know about Christianity. I know it says to care for widows and orphans. I know it says to love your neighbor as yourself. I know it says to judge not lest ye be judged. Another step. And I know that Jesus spent his time with sinners and outcasts, not with men in fancy coats who look down their noses at people who've got less than them. Ezekiel's jaw worked. You dare. I dare. Because I've been watching this woman for weeks now. I've seen her work herself to the bone. I've seen her put her children first every single time, even when she had nothing left to give. And I've seen those children fed, clothed, warm, loved, despite everything the world's thrown at them. He stopped just a foot from Ezekiel now, close enough to touch. So you can take your papers, and your judge, and your Christian charity, and you can get off my land, because these children aren't going anywhere. The silence stretched long and thin. Then Ezekiel smiled. You think you can stop the law? You think standing there with your guns and your threats changes anything? He looked at Clara over Josiah's shoulder. I'll be back in 3 days with the sheriff. And if you're not willing to surrender the children peacefully, I'll have you arrested for obstruction. Both of you. He turned and walked back to his carriage. The driver helped him up, and the matched bays started moving. Just before the carriage pulled away, Ezekiel leaned out the window. 3 days, Clara. Use them wisely. Then he was gone. Clara's legs gave out the moment the carriage disappeared around the bend. She would have hit the ground if Josiah hadn't caught her. I've got you, he murmured. I've got you. 3 days. Her voice was barely a whisper. That's not enough time. That's not... It's enough. How is it enough? He helped her to the porch steps, lowered her gently. The children surrounded them all, talking at once, asking questions Clara couldn't begin to answer. Quiet, Josiah said. Not harsh, but firm. All of you. Give your mama a minute. They went quiet. Even the twins, who never went quiet. Josiah crouched in front of Clara. Listen to me. We're going to fix this. You can't fix the law. The law isn't always right, and judges can be wrong. Those papers he's got, they're based on lies, old information, things that aren't true anymore. It doesn't matter what's true. It matters what's written down. Then we get it written down different. Clara looked at him. What do you mean? Doc Pearson was here last week. He saw Thomas. He saw how well these children are doing, how strong they're getting. His word carries weight in this territory. Josiah's eyes were intense. And there's Widow Boone 3 miles down the road. She's known me 20 years. She can vouch for my character and yours by extension. That's not enough to overturn a judge's order. Maybe not, but it might be enough to delay it, to buy us time to appeal, to find a lawyer to build a real case. He took her hands. Clara, I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. But bad isn't the same as hopeless. You've survived worse than this. Have I? You survived Daniel. You survived the winter. You survived that day in the snow when you were ready to give up. His grip tightened. You're still here. Your children are still here. And as long as that's true, we've got a chance. Clara stared at him. This man who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago. This man who'd carried her son out of the cold and stood up to a preacher and looked at her like she was worth fighting for. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why do you care so much? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I spent 6 years running from everything that hurt, hiding up here on my mountain, telling myself I was better off alone. And then you came along, you and your 5 children and your stubborn pride, and you made me remember what it felt like to have something worth protecting. He reached up and touched her face. Just a brush of his fingers against her cheek, so gentle it made her chest ache. I can't promise you we'll win, he said. But I can promise you I'll be here, whatever happens, as long as you want me. Clara's vision blurred with tears. I want you, she whispered. God help me, I want you. His forehead touched hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air while the children watched and the wind blew cold off the mountains. Then Samuel's voice broke through. So what's the plan? Clara pulled back, wiped her eyes, looked at her son standing there with his knife in his belt and determination in his eyes. The plan, she said slowly, is to fight. The next 3 days were the longest of Clara's life. Josiah rode out the first morning before dawn. He went to Doc Pearson's first, then to Widow Boone's, then to a lawyer in town whose name Clara couldn't remember. He came back each night exhausted and grim-faced, but with more pieces in place. Doc wrote a letter, he told her the first night. Says Thomas is recovering well, children are healthy and cared for. He'll testify if it comes to that. And the widow? She'll stand with us. Said she's been wanting an excuse to put Ezekiel Whitmore in his place for years. Clara almost smiled. Almost. The second day Josiah brought her to town. She hadn't wanted to go, hadn't wanted to face the stares, the whispers, the judgment of people who'd never lifted a finger to help her. But Josiah said she needed to be seen, needed to show them she wasn't the broken woman Ezekiel had described. So she dressed in her best dress, the blue one faded but clean, and pinned up her hair, and walked down the main street of Rawlins with her head held high. People stared. Of course they stared. But Clara stared right back. At the general store she bought flour and sugar and a ribbon for each of the girls. At the land office she filed paperwork for her homestead, proving she hadn't abandoned it. At the church, not Ezekiel's church, but a small Methodist chapel on the edge of town, she spoke to the minister about her situation. He was a young man, kind-eyed and soft-spoken. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. I can't make any promises, he said, but I can speak to the circuit judge when he comes through next week. There may be options you haven't considered. What kind of options? He hesitated. If you were married, the case would be different. A mother alone is vulnerable in the eyes of the law. But a mother with a husband, especially a husband of good standing, that's another matter entirely. Clara felt Josiah stiffen beside her. She didn't look at him. "Thank you, Reverend," she said. "I'll think about it." They rode back to the cabin in silence. The sun was setting, painting the snow gold and pink, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with the minister's words. "If you were married." "You don't have to," Josiah said suddenly. She turned to look at him. "What? Marry me. You don't have to. There might be another way. We'll find another way." "And if we don't?" He was quiet. "Josiah." Clara reached over and touched his arm. "I'm not going to pretend we're in love. I'm not going to pretend this is some fairy tale where everything works out because it's supposed to. But I know you're a good man. I know you care about my children. And I know—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I know I feel something for you. Something I didn't think I'd ever feel again. Maybe it's not love yet. Maybe it's just gratitude or fear or loneliness. But it's something. And if marrying you means keeping my children—" "Clara, let me finish." Her voice was steady now, certain. "If marrying you means keeping my children, then I'll do it. Gladly. But only if you want the same thing. Only if you can look me in the eye and tell me you're not just doing this out of pity." Josiah pulled the wagon to a stop. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious and open, and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I spent 6 years building walls," he said. 6 years telling myself I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone, couldn't survive losing anyone else. And then you showed up in that snowstorm, and every wall I built came crashing down." He took her hands. "I'm not asking you to marry me out of pity, Clara. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. I'm asking because your children have become my children in every way that matters. I'm asking because—" His voice broke. "Because I love you. And I know it's too soon to say that, and I know you might not feel the same way, but it's true. I love you. I've loved you since the moment you looked up at me from that snow and told me you were done." Clara's heart stopped. Then it started again, faster than before. "Yes," she whispered. "What?" "Yes." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want this. Yes." Josiah stared at her like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then his face broke into a smile, a real smile, wide and warm and full of joy, and he pulled her into his arms. They held each other in the wagon as the sun sank below the horizon, and for the first time in months, Clara felt like everything might actually be okay. The wedding happened the next morning. It wasn't fancy. There were no flowers, no music, no guests except the children and Widow Boone, who'd come to witness. The young minister from town performed the ceremony in Josiah's cabin, his voice steady and solemn. Clara wore her blue dress. Josiah wore his cleanest shirt. The twins threw dried corn kernels instead of rice, and Thomas coughed through the vows, and Samuel stood in the corner with his arms crossed and his eyes suspiciously bright. When it was over, when the minister had pronounced them man and wife, and Josiah had kissed her soft and sweet and full of promise, Clara looked around at her family and felt something she'd forgotten existed. Peace. They had 1 hour before Ezekiel came back. 1 hour to prepare. 1 hour to gather their courage. 1 hour to become the family they were always meant to be. When the sound of hooves echoed up the mountain road, Clara was ready. Clara stood on the porch with her husband beside her. The word still felt strange in her mind. Husband. She'd had one before, and he'd faded away from her like smoke through her fingers. But Josiah was different. Josiah was solid, real, standing next to her like he'd been there all along, like he'd been waiting for her his whole life. The carriage came into view, and this time it wasn't alone. 2 riders flanked it, men with badges pinned to their coats and rifles across their saddles. The sheriff himself rode in front, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and tired eyes. Behind them all came Ezekiel's black carriage, polished and gleaming like something from another world. Clara's heart pounded. Her palms were slick with sweat. But she didn't move, didn't flinch. "Remember what we talked about," Josiah murmured. "I remember." "Let me do the talking at first. When the time comes, you'll know." She nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. The procession stopped at the edge of the property. The sheriff dismounted, first, his boots crunching in the snow. He looked up at the cabin, at Clara and Josiah on the porch, at the faces of the children peering through the window. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called. "Mrs. Callahan," Clara corrected. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "As of this morning." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. He glanced back at Ezekiel, who was climbing down from his carriage, with a look of barely contained fury. "What did you say?" "I said my name is Clara Callahan now. I was married this morning by Reverend Thomas from the Methodist church in town." She held up her left hand, showing the simple band Josiah had placed there an hour ago. "I have the certificate inside if you'd like to see it." Ezekiel's face had gone red. "This is a trick. A desperate ploy to—" "It's not a trick," Josiah interrupted. "It's a legal marriage witnessed and recorded. I've got the papers to prove it." The sheriff looked between them, clearly uncertain. This wasn't what he'd been expecting. Clara could see him recalculating, reassessing. "Reverend Whitmore," he said slowly, "you told me we'd be collecting children from an unfit mother living in sin. That don't appear to be the situation." "The situation is exactly as I described it," Ezekiel snapped. "She was living with this man unmarried for weeks. The marriage is clearly a sham designed to circumvent the law. With respect, Reverend, the law doesn't much care about the reasons behind a marriage. It cares about whether it's legal." The sheriff turned back to Clara. "Ma'am, is this man your husband of your own free will?" "Yes." "And you want to stay here with him raising your children?" "More than anything." The sheriff nodded slowly. He pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Well, Reverend, I'm not sure what you want me to do here. The court order was for custody of children belonging to an unmarried widow living in unsuitable conditions. This woman is married now. That changes things." "It changes nothing." Ezekiel stepped forward, his voice rising. "The judge's order is clear. Those children are to be removed and placed in my custody." "The judge's order was based on information you provided." A new voice joined the conversation. Doc Pearson stepped out from behind the cabin where he'd been waiting. "Information that wasn't entirely accurate." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "Henry Pearson. I'm the doctor for this territory. I've been treating the Whitmore boy, pardon me, the Callahan boy, for lung fever these past 2 weeks. He held up a folded paper. "I've got a full medical report here, Sheriff. Those children are healthy, well-fed, and well cared for. Better than most I see in proper towns." "That's one man's opinion," Ezekiel said dismissively. "It's a licensed physician's professional assessment." Doc Pearson's voice was sharp. "And I'd be happy to testify to it in any court in the territory." "As would I." Widow Boone appeared from the other side of the cabin, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes hard as flint. She walked with a cane, but there was nothing frail about the way she planted herself next to Clara. "Martha Boone," she said to the sheriff. "I've lived in this territory for 32 years. I knew Josiah Callahan's father before him, and I've visited this cabin 3 times in the past week to check on these children. And your assessment, ma'am?" "My assessment is that Clara Callahan is one of the finest mothers I've ever seen. She came through a winter that would have killed most men, kept 5 children alive on nothing but grit and prayer, and never once complained or asked for handouts." She turned to look at Ezekiel. which is more than I can say for some people who call themselves Christians. Ezekiel's face was purple now. This is absurd. These people are obviously in collusion. Collusion. The sheriff's voice had gone cold. Reverend, you brought me up here on a 2-hour ride to take children away from their mother. You told me she was living in squalor, that the children were starving, that she was an immoral woman, unfit to raise them. What I'm seeing is a clean cabin, healthy kids, and a woman who just got married to a respected landowner. He put his hat back on. I'm not in the habit of tearing families apart based on one man's grudge. This isn't a grudge. This is about the welfare of those children. Is it? Clara stepped forward. She'd been quiet long enough. Is it really about the children, Ezekiel? Or is it about punishing me? I don't know what you're... You never forgave me for taking Daniel away from you, for convincing him to come west instead of staying in Pennsylvania to work in your church. You blamed me when he got sick. You blamed me when he died. And now you want to take the only thing I have left, my children, because you can't stand the thought that I might actually be happy. The words poured out of her like water through a broken dam. Years of resentment, years of silence, finally finding their voice. You talk about Christian charity. But where was your charity when Daniel was dying? Where were your letters, your prayers, your support? You abandoned your own brother Ezekiel. You let him die alone because you were too proud to admit you were wrong about me. I'm not finished. Clara's voice cracked like a whip. I buried my husband with my own 2 hands. I dug the grave myself because the ground was frozen and there was no one else to do it. I held my children while they cried and told them their father was in heaven, even though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. And I kept going. Every single day I kept going. Because that's what mothers do. She was crying now, but she didn't care. The tears rolled down her cheeks, and she let them fall. So you can stand there with your fancy coat, and your judge's papers, and your righteous anger, but you don't get to tell me I'm unfit. You don't get to take my children. And you don't get to pretend this is about anything other than your own wounded pride. The silence that followed was deafening. Ezekiel stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. For the first time since she'd known him, he seemed to have nothing to say. The sheriff cleared his throat. Ma'am, I think you've made your position clear. He turned to Ezekiel. Reverend, I'm not going to enforce this order. Not today. Not under these circumstances. If you want to pursue this further, you'll need to go back to Judge Harrison and get a new order, one that accounts for the current situation. Until then, these children stay where they are. You can't do this, Ezekiel sputtered. I have the law. The law isn't a weapon, Reverend. It's supposed to protect people. And from where I'm standing, these people don't need protecting from their mother. They need protecting from you. He mounted his horse and nodded to his deputies. We're done here. Let's go. The 3 lawmen rode away without looking back. Ezekiel stood alone in the snow, his carriage waiting behind him, his face a mask of shock and fury. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is. Josiah stepped forward, placing himself between Ezekiel and the cabin. You heard the sheriff. You've got no legal standing here. And if you come back, if you try anything else, you'll have to go through me. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The 2 men stared at each other. Clara could feel the tension crackling between them like lightning before a storm. Then Ezekiel turned away. You'll regret this, he said as he climbed into his carriage. All of you. God sees what you've done here today. So do I, Clara replied, and I'm not ashamed of any of it. The carriage pulled away, disappearing down the mountain road. Clara watched until it was gone, until the sound of hooves faded into silence, until there was nothing left but the wind and the snow and the steady presence of her husband beside her. Then her knees buckled. Josiah caught her before she hit the ground. I've got you, he said, the same words he'd spoken that first day in the snow. I've got you. She clung to him, shaking, laughing, crying all at once. The children came pouring out of the cabin surrounding them, asking questions, demanding explanations. The twins were crying. Thomas was coughing. Samuel stood apart, his face unreadable. "Is it over?" Abigail asked. "Mama, is it really over?" Clara looked at her daughter, her beautiful, brave daughter, who'd grown up too fast and felt her heart overflow. "It's over, baby. It's over." Samuel finally moved. He walked up to Josiah and stopped looking up at the man who'd become his stepfather in the space of a morning. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing up for us." Josiah put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's what family does." Samuel's jaw trembled. Then he threw his arms around Josiah and held on tight. Clara watched them, her son and her husband, two broken people finding their way to each other, and something in her chest finally let go. That night they celebrated. It wasn't much of a celebration, just stew and bread and the last of the dried apples, but it felt like a feast. The children laughed and talked over each other, their voices filling the cabin with noise and life. Even Thomas was smiling, his color better than it had been in weeks. Doc Pearson stayed for dinner along with Widow Boone. They sat around the table like a strange, mismatched family, passing dishes and trading stories. "Should have seen his face," Doc Pearson said, chuckling into his whiskey. "When you pulled out that marriage certificate, I thought old Ezekiel was going to have a stroke right there in the snow." "Served him right," Widow Boone said grimly. "That man's been a thorn in this territory's side for years, coming out here once a year to tell us all how we're living wrong, then going back to his fancy church and forgetting we exist." "He won't forget after today," Josiah said. "No, he won't." The widow looked at Clara, her eyes softening. "You did good, child. Stood your ground when most would have crumbled. Your husband would be proud." Clara's throat tightened. "Which one?" The widow smiled. "Both of them." Later, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Clara sat on the porch with Josiah. The stars were out bright and cold, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "You're quiet," Josiah said. "I'm thinking." "About what?" She leaned into him, feeling his warmth against the chill of the night. "About how strange life is. A month ago, I was ready to die. I was kneeling in the snow waiting for God to take me. And now I have a husband, a home, a future." She looked up at him. "I don't know how to feel about that. Part of me is happy, so happy I can barely breathe. But part of me feels guilty, like I don't deserve this." Josiah was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You know what I was doing a month ago?" "What?" "Same thing I'd been doing for 6 years. Waking up alone. Working until I was too tired to think. Going to bed alone. Trying not to remember what it felt like to have someone beside me." He pulled her closer. "I told myself I was fine. Told myself I didn't need anyone. But I was lying. I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing again. Scared of loving someone and having them taken away." His voice roughened. "When Margaret died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd used up all the love I had. But then you came along and—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "And what?" "And I realized I was wrong. Love isn't something you use up. It's something that grows. The more you give, the more you have." He looked down at her, his eyes bright in the starlight. "You didn't steal anything from Margaret by loving me, Clara. And you're not betraying Daniel by being happy. You're honoring them, living the life they would have wanted for you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you know that?" "Because if it were me, if I'd died and left Margaret alone, I would have wanted her to find someone, to be happy, to keep living." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's what love is. Wanting the best for someone even when you can't be there to give it yourself." She turned her face into his chest and let the tears come. Not tears of grief this time, but of release, of letting go. They sat there for a long time holding each other, while the stars wheeled overhead and the night wrapped around them like a blanket. The next morning, Samuel came to Clara with a question. "Can I call him Pa?" Clara looked at her son. He was standing in the doorway of the cabin, his face serious, his hands shoved in his pockets. "What?" "Mr. Callahan, Josiah." Samuel swallowed. "Can I call him Pa? I know he's not my real father. I know that. But he feels like—" He stopped, struggling for words. "He feels like what, sweetheart? He feels like what a father should feel like." Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. "Papa was sick for so long. By the end, he couldn't even remember my name sometimes. But Josiah, he teaches me things. He listens when I talk. He makes me feel like I matter." His chin trembled. "I loved Papa. I did. But I never felt safe with him. Not the way I feel safe with Josiah." Clara's heart broke and healed in the same moment. She crossed the room and pulled her son into her arms. He was almost as tall as her now. When had that happened? But he leaned into her embrace, like the little boy he still was underneath. "You can call him whatever you want," she said. "Whatever feels right to you." "Will he mind? Why don't you ask him yourself?" Samuel pulled back, wiping his eyes. He nodded once, then turned and walked out into the morning light. Clara watched through the window as he approached Josiah, who was splitting wood by the barn. She couldn't hear what they said, but she saw Josiah set down his axe, saw him kneel in the snow so he was eye level with Samuel, saw them talk serious and quiet. Then Josiah pulled Samuel into a hug, a real hug, the kind Daniel had never been strong enough to give, and held him tight. Clara pressed her hand to her heart and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The weeks that followed were the happiest Clara could remember. Spring crept closer slowly at first, then faster. The snow began to melt. The days grew longer. The children shed their heavy coats and ran outside, their laughter echoing across the mountains. Thomas's cough finally cleared. Doc Pearson declared him fully recovered on his last visit, shaking his head in wonder. "Never seen a turnaround like that," he said. "That boy was halfway to the grave when you brought him in. Now look at him." Thomas was outside helping Samuel mend a fence. He was still thin, still pale, but his eyes were bright and his movements were strong. "He's got his mother's fight in him," Doc Pearson said. "That's what saved him more than any medicine I gave." Clara smiled. "We Whitmores are stubborn." "Callahan's now," the doctor corrected with a twinkle in his eye. "And thank God for it." The cabin expanded that spring. Josiah added a room for the boys, then another for the girls. The twins got their own bed for the first time in their lives, and promptly refused to sleep apart anyway. Clara planted a garden behind the cabin, vegetables mostly, but also flowers. Marigolds and daisies, and a single rose bush she'd dug up from her old homestead, the one Daniel had planted for her the year they were married. "You sure you want that here?" Josiah asked, watching her pat the soil around its roots. "I'm sure." She sat back on her heels, looking at the small, thorny plant. "It's not about holding on to the past. It's about bringing the good parts with me into the future." Josiah knelt beside her. "I like that." "Like what?" "The way you think about things. The way you find the light in everything, even when it's dark." Clara looked at him. Really looked at him, this man who'd changed her life without even trying, and felt her heart swell. "I didn't used to," she said. "Find the light, I mean. For a long time all I could see was the dark." "What changed?" She reached out and touched his face, rough with stubble, warm beneath her fingers. "You did." He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on," he said. "Samuel wants to show us something." They walked together toward the barn, where Samuel was waiting with the horses. He'd been working on something for weeks, refusing to tell anyone what it was. "Close your eyes," he said. "Both of you." Clara and Josiah exchanged a look, then obeyed. She heard Samuel's footsteps, the creak of the barn door, the soft nicker of the horses. Then silence. "Okay. You can look now." Clara opened her eyes. Above the barn door, carved into a new wooden plank, were the words, "Callahan Family, Homestead, Est, 1879. The letters were uneven, clearly carved by a young hand, but they were deep and sure. Samuel stood beneath them, his face flushed with pride and nervousness. "I wanted us to have a sign," he said, "like a real family. I know it's not perfect, but—" He didn't get to finish. Clara threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. Josiah joined them a moment later, wrapping them both in his broad arms. The girls came running from the cabin, drawn by the commotion. Thomas followed more slowly, but he was smiling. They stood there in the spring sunshine, all 7 of them now, a family made, not by blood, but by choice. And Clara felt something settle into place in her soul. She was home. Not just in this cabin, on this land with this man, but truly, finally home. In a way, she'd never been before. Summer came to the mountains like a blessing. Clara woke each morning to birdsong and sunlight streaming through windows that no longer needed quilts stuffed in the cracks. She'd lie there for a moment, feeling Josiah's warmth beside her, listening to the sounds of the children stirring in their rooms, and let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten existed: gratitude. 6 months ago, she'd been kneeling in the snow, ready to die. Now she was alive in ways she hadn't been in years, maybe ever. "You're thinking again." Josiah's voice was rough with sleep. He rolled toward her, one arm draping across her waist. "How can you tell? You get this little line between your eyebrows." He reached up and smoothed it with his thumb. "What is it this time?" "Nothing bad. Just remembering." "Remembering what?" "The day you found me." She turned to face him. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you'd kept riding, if you'd been someone else, if you'd decided I wasn't worth stopping for." "That wasn't ever going to happen." "How do you know?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her face. "Because I think I was riding toward you my whole life," he said finally. "I just didn't know it until I saw you there in the snow." Clara's throat tightened. Even now, after months of marriage, he could still say things that knocked the breath out of her. "I love you," she whispered. "I know." He kissed her forehead. "I love you too." The bedroom door burst open. "Mama, Pa!" Lucy came flying in, her twin sister right behind her. "There's a man coming up the road." Clara's heart seized. For one terrible moment she was back in that cabin in February, watching Ezekiel's carriage approach, with the sheriff at his side. But Josiah was already up, already moving to the window. "It's all right," he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. "It's just the mail carrier." Clara pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. 6 months of peace, and she still jumped at every unexpected visitor. She wondered if that would ever change. "Come on," Josiah held out his hand. "Let's see what he's brought us." The mail carrier was a young man named Pete, who rode through the territory once a week, carrying letters and packages to the scattered homesteads. He was cheerful and chatty, always full of news from town. "Got a few things for you today, Mr. Callahan?" He handed over a small bundle. "Letter from Cheyenne couple catalogs and this." He held up a larger envelope, thick and official-looking. Clara's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Pete shrugged. "Don't know, ma'am, but it's got a fancy seal on it. Looks important." Josiah took the envelope. His face was carefully neutral, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you, Pete. You want to stay for coffee?" "Can't today, sir. Got a lot of ground to cover before dark. But I appreciate the offer." He rode off with a wave, leaving them standing in the yard with the mysterious envelope between them. "Open it," Clara said. Josiah broke the seal and pulled out a folded letter. His eyes moved across the page, and Clara watched his expression change from tension to confusion to something that looked almost like wonder. "What is it? What does it say?" He looked up at her. "It's from Judge Harrison, in Cheyenne." Her heart stopped. "Ezekiel." "No, not Ezekiel." He handed her the letter. "Read it yourself." Clara took the paper with shaking hands. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, it has come to my attention that I was grievously misled in the matter of custody regarding the Whitmore children. Upon investigation, it has been determined that the information provided by Reverend Ezekiel Whitmore was inaccurate, exaggerated, and in some cases entirely fabricated. Furthermore, I have received testimony from multiple respected citizens of your territory, including Dr. Henry Pearson, Mrs. Martha Boone, and Reverend James Thomas, attesting to the excellent care being provided to these children in your home. I am writing to inform you that all previous custody orders have been vacated. The children, Samuel Abigail Thomas Lucy and Hannah, are legally and permanently in the custody of their mother Clara Callahan and her husband Josiah Callahan. Additionally, Reverend Whitmore has been censured by the territorial court for filing a fraudulent petition. He has been ordered to cease all contact with your family and may face further legal consequences if he persists. I apologize for any distress this matter has caused you and your family. May God bless and keep you. Sincerely, Judge William Harrison. Territorial Court, Cheyenne. Clara read the letter twice, then a third time. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over. It's really over." She looked up at Josiah. He was smiling that rare full smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "We won," she said. "We won." She threw herself into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. He caught her, lifted her, spun her around like she weighed nothing at all. "What's happening?" Samuel came running from the barn, Thomas right behind him. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Clara pulled back from Josiah, wiping her eyes. "Everything's right. Everything's finally right." She showed them the letter. Samuel read it slowly, his lips moving with each word. When he finished, he looked up at his mother with an expression she'd never seen before. "He can't take us." "No, baby. He can't take you. Not ever. It's official. Legal. It's official. Legal. Permanent." Samuel's face crumpled. For a moment he looked like the 12-year-old boy he actually was, instead of the little man he'd been forced to become. Then he threw his arms around Clara and held on tight. "I was so scared, Mama," he whispered. "Even after everything. Even after the wedding and the sheriff leaving, I was so scared he'd come back." "I know, sweetheart. I was scared too. But we don't have to be scared anymore." Clara pulled back and looked at her son, really looked at him, seeing the fear that had lived behind his eyes for months finally beginning to fade. "No," she said, "we don't have to be scared anymore." That night they had a celebration, not like the quiet dinner after Ezekiel left. This was a real celebration with neighbors and friends and more food than the cabin could hold. Doc Pearson came with 2 bottles of whiskey. Widow Boone brought 3 pies and enough gossip to last a month. Even Reverend Thomas made the ride up from town, his young face beaming as he surveyed the family he'd helped bring together. The children ran wild drunk on freedom and summer air. The twins chased fireflies until they collapsed in the grass giggling. Abigail taught Thomas to dance badly, while Samuel pretended to be too old for such things, then joined in anyway when he thought no one was looking. Clara sat on the porch and watched it all, a cup of something strong in her hand and her husband's arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" Josiah asked. "More than I've ever been." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You deserve it. So do you." He was quiet for a moment. Then so soft she almost didn't hear, "I never thought I'd have this again. A family. A home that felt like more than just walls and a roof." "Neither did I. Margaret would have liked you." The words caught Clara off guard. Josiah rarely spoke about his first wife, not because it was painful, but because some things were too sacred for ordinary conversation. You think so? I know so. She had a way of seeing people, really seeing them, not just the surface. He looked at her. She would have seen what I see when I look at you. What do you see? Strength, courage, a heart so big it scares me sometimes. His voice roughened. She would have told me not to let you go, would have kicked my backside if I'd tried. Clara laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. I wish I could have known her. In a way you do. She's part of what made me who I am, and I'm— He stopped, struggling for words. I'm the man who loves you, so she's part of that too. Clara leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Do you think they're watching? She asked. Daniel and Margaret. Do you think they know we found each other? I think— He paused. I think if there's anything after this life, they're together somewhere, grateful that we didn't give up, that we kept going, that we found a way to be happy even after losing them. That's a nice thought. It's more than a thought. It's what I believe. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fireflies dance and the children laugh and the stars come out one by one. Then Widow Boone's voice cut through the evening air. Clara Callahan, get over here and tell this fool doctor he's wrong about the best way to make pie crust. Clara laughed and stood up. Duty calls. Go save the world, Josiah said with a smile. I'll be here when you get back. She kissed him quick and sweet, then went to join the argument. Autumn came with a harvest richer than any Clara could remember. The garden she'd planted in spring had flourished beyond all expectations. Vegetables filled the root cellar. Preserved fruits lined the shelves. The livestock had multiplied, and the fields were thick with grain ready for winter storage. But the real harvest wasn't in the food or the animals or the land. It was in the family that gathered around the dinner table each night, laughing and talking and arguing the way families do. It was in Samuel calling Josiah Pa without hesitation now, without the fear that saying it might make it less true. It was in Thomas running and playing like any healthy boy, his lungs clear and his eyes bright. It was in the twins, secure enough to sleep in separate beds, at last growing into their own small personalities. It was in Abigail blossoming into a young woman who reminded Clara more of herself every day. It was in Josiah, too, the way the shadows had lifted from his eyes, the way he smiled more easily now, the way he moved through the world like a man who finally had something worth living for. And it was in Clara herself. In the woman she'd become since that day in the snow. Stronger, softer, more herself than she'd ever been. One evening in late October, as the leaves turned gold and the air grew crisp, Clara found herself standing alone at the edge of the property. She came here sometimes to the spot where you could see the mountains in one direction and the valley in the other. It was her thinking place, her remembering place. Thought I'd find you here. She turned. Josiah was walking toward her, his coat collar turned up against the wind. How'd you know? Because I know you. He stopped beside her, looking out at the view. Something on your mind. Always. Want to talk about it? She was quiet for a moment, trying to find the words. I've been thinking about the woman I was, she finally said. Before Daniel got sick, before the homestead, before everything. What was she like? Young, hopeful, full of dreams about the future. Clara shook her head. I barely recognize her now. That's not a bad thing. I know. It's just strange. Looking back at all the things I thought I wanted and realizing I have something so much better now. She turned to face him. I never would have imagined this life, not in a million years. Neither would I. Does that ever scare you? How close we came to missing each other? Josiah thought about it. No, he said finally. Because I don't think we could have missed each other. I think we were always going to end up here one way or another. The universe has a way of putting people where they need to be. You really believe that? I have to. Because the alternative that all of this is just random chance doesn't explain how I feel when I look at you. He took her hand. This isn't an accident, Clara. We're not an accident. She squeezed his fingers. No, we're not. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The mountains caught the light and held it glowing like something out of a dream. I want to tell you something, Clara said. What is it? She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. I'm pregnant. The word hung in the air between them. Josiah stared at her. His face went through a dozen emotions: shock, disbelief, fear, hope, before settling on something that looked like wonder. You're sure? Doc Pearson confirmed it last week. I wanted to wait until I was certain before I told you. Clara. His voice broke. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. Clara, I know you lost a child before. I know this must bring up painful memories. If you need time to... Stop. He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. His eyes were wet with tears. Don't you understand? This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me. You're not scared? Terrified. He laughed, a rough, broken sound. But I wouldn't trade this fear for anything in the world. I love you. I love you too. Both of you. He placed a hand on her still flat stomach. All of you. This whole impossible, wonderful family we've built. Clara covered his hand with her own. I was thinking. She said, if it's a girl, we could name her Margaret, after your first wife. Josiah went still. You'd do that. She gave me you. Or at least she helped make you who you are. It seems only right. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The tears streaming down his weathered face said everything. They held each other as the last light faded and the first stars appeared, and Clara felt something she'd stopped believing in years ago. A future. The baby came in spring. It was easier than Clara's other births, faster, less painful, as if the child knew she was coming into a home where she was wanted and loved. Doc Pearson delivered her just after dawn, with Josiah pacing outside the door and the children clustered on the porch, too anxious to stay inside, but too worried to go far. When the first cry split the morning air, Josiah burst through the door without waiting for permission. Is she? She's perfect. Clara lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled against her chest. Come meet your daughter. He approached slowly, reverently, like a man entering a church. When he looked down at the baby, at her tiny face and her dark hair and her perfect miniature fingers, something in him shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. Margaret, he whispered. Margaret Rose Callahan. Clara smiled up at him. What do you think? I think... His voice failed him. He tried again. I think she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She has your eyes. She has your stubbornness. I can already tell. Clara laughed, then winced. Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts. Sorry. But he wasn't sorry at all. He was smiling so wide it looked like his face might split open. Can I hold her? Of course you can. She's your daughter. He took the baby, carefully cradling her against his broad chest like she was made of glass. She opened her eyes, dark and knowing, like she understood exactly where she was and who she was with, and looked up at her father. Hello, little one, Josiah murmured. Welcome to the family. The other children crowded into the room, then unable to wait any longer. Samuel hung back at first, unsure of his place in this new configuration, until Clara held out her hand. Come here. Come meet your sister. He approached the bed slowly, looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket, and something softened in his expression that had been hard for too long. She's so small. You were small once too. I don't remember. I do. Clara touched his cheek. I remember everything. Every moment from the day you were born to now. And I want you to know something, Samuel. What? This baby doesn't change anything. Not about us, not about your place in this family. You're my son, my firstborn. Nothing in this world will ever change that." Samuel's eyes glistened. "I know, Mama. Do you?" "I do now." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, then his sister's. Then he straightened up and looked at Josiah with an expression that made Clara's heart swell. "Pa, can I hold her too?" "Of course you can, son." Josiah passed the baby to Samuel with the same care he'd used to take her. The boy held his sister like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. The twins pressed close, wanting to see. Thomas asked questions about everything. Abigail declared that the baby looked like Mama and started planning all the things she'd teach her. And in the middle of it all, Clara and Josiah found each other's hands and held on tight. This was it. This was everything she'd never dared to hope for, never believed she deserved. A home, a family, a love that had found her when she'd stopped looking. "Thank you," she whispered. Josiah looked at her. For what? For stopping. That day in the snow. For seeing me when no one else did. He leaned down and kissed her soft and sweet and full of promise. "I would stop 1,000 times," he said. 1,000,000 times. Every time, Clara. I would always stop for you." 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their home and watched her family. The homestead had grown. 2 more rooms added to the cabin, a bigger barn, a second corral for the horses Samuel was learning to train, a schoolhouse at the edge of the property where Abigail, 16 now, and Brilliant, taught the younger children their letters. Thomas was tall and strong, no trace of the sickly boy he'd been. The twins were 10 as different from each other as 2 children could be, and twice as much trouble combined. Little Margaret Maggie, they called her, was 4 years old, and already had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. And there was another one on the way. Clara's hand rested on the swell of her belly, where Josiah's second child grew strong and sure. "Mama," Maggie came running across the yard, her dark braids flying behind her. "Mama, Papa says dinner's ready, and if you don't come inside, he's going to eat all the pie himself." "Is that so?" "That's so." Josiah appeared in the doorway grinning. "A man can only wait so long." Clara laughed and let Maggie drag her inside where the table was set, and the family was gathered, and everything she'd ever wanted was right there in front of her. They said grace together, a new tradition Josiah had started after Maggie was born, and then the chaos of a family dinner began. Food passed hand to hand, stories told over each other, laughter rising like music to the rafters. Clara looked around the table at the faces she loved her children, her husband, the life they'd built from nothing but hope and stubbornness and the refusal to give up. She thought about that day in the snow, about kneeling in the cold, ready to let go, about the moment she'd heard hoofbeats through the storm and looked up to see a stranger who would become her whole world. "What are you thinking about?" Josiah's voice soft in her ear. He'd moved his chair closer without her noticing the way he always did. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. We're lucky. We are." She leaned into him, feeling his strength, his warmth, his steady presence beside her. "We really are." Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara stood at the window and looked out at the land that had become hers. The mountains rose in the distance, silver in the moonlight. The fields stretched out below, dark and peaceful. Somewhere an owl called, and another answered. She felt Josiah's arms wrap around her from behind. "Come to bed," he murmured. "In a minute." "What are you looking at?" "Everything." She turned in his arms facing him. "Our everything." He smiled that rare, full smile she'd fallen in love with and kissed her forehead. "It's a good everything. The best." They stood there for a moment longer, holding each other in the moonlight. 2 people who had been broken and had chosen to heal together. Then Clara took her husband's hand and led him to bed, and the last light in the cabin went dark, and the Callahan homestead slept peacefully under the stars. The widow who had carried her children through the snow had become so much more than she'd ever dreamed. She had become whole. She had become home. She had become exactly who she was always meant to be. And that was more than enough. That was everything.